On 5 News, the growing row over grammar schools. The government says more could be on the way, but there are plenty of critics, including some of those who could be taught in them.
I don't think you should be sitting an exam that's that important when you're 11.
I would feel really nervous and really anxious if I didn't get into that school.
So, is returning to divisive grammar schools the right way forward? Also this evening, getting ready for flood season. £12.5 million spent on new barriers, but will they protect at-risk areas from this?
Hi, you're through to someone you can speak to at Childline.
The Children's Helpline reveals a record rise in suicide calls as families who've lost loved ones say people need to listen before it's too late.
He always knew that I was there for him. We always spoke. We spoke because we were brothers. We were best friends as well. And you know, a couple of weeks after that, you know, I didn't get the opportunity to speak to him again.
Several careless owners in need of some modernisation. How sprucing up Westminster could cost us a fortune. And going for glory, Sarah Storey attempts to become Britain's most successful Paralympian ever. Welcome to 5 News. I'm Danny Sinha. It has long been an extremely divisive issue. Now a row is erupting again over proposals to revive grammar schools in England. The government says they provide outstanding education and insists that having an element of selection won't split pupils into successes and failures. But many critics say it's wrong for children to sit tests that decide their future at such a young age. Our political editor, Andy Bell, has been finding out the opinion of teachers, ministers and pupils.
In England, for most pupils, it's been back to school this week, but soon will more of them be going to grammar schools. Bethan, Theo and Sanya have just arrived at this East London comprehensive. So how would they have felt about sitting an exam last term, which could have decided where they went?
I don't think you should be sitting an exam that's that important when you're 11.
I would feel really nervous and really anxious if I didn't get into that school.
Maybe it would be a good school for you. Do you think that might work sometimes?
It would work, but say if like all your friends are going to a different school and you're the only one that's going to that school, I wouldn't really like it.
At the moment, academic selection normally plays no part in which school you go to. But introduce an exam like the old 11 Plus, and some will pass and go on to the grammar school. Some will fail and go to the existing local secondary school. This school is rated outstanding by Ofsted, so the head isn't convinced that there's need to change the system.
1 in 8 of the children in this school already left with 8 A's or A stars already. And that is replicated across many schools in this borough. My answer would be, why not look at the good schools like ours and try and replicate that nationwide and change the whole system?
There are only about 160 grammar schools left in England, but last year for the first time, one was allowed to expand in Kent. The local MP supports the plan for more.
We have grammar schools in Kent, and the key is in my constituency, there is real choice. I have an academy. 2 academies, I have a free school, and my constituents have access to grammar schools, and that's the key. There's got to be sufficient choice.
Today, Labour made its opposition clear.
This policy fails on every single count. It may be a new Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, but the same old nasty Tories.
The Education Secretary responded by saying there's been no announcement yet, but on the principle...
We do believe selection can play a role. We think that there is evidence to show that it does for many children who are in grammar schools.
For nearly 40 years, governments have considered academic selection and grammar schools part of the past. No longer.
So, Andy, everyone's got their own opinions about grammar schools, so the Prime Minister potentially opening a can of worms here.
Yes, one minister has pointed out to me that Justine Greening today didn't talk about bringing in new grammar schools, and it's true we don't have the details yet, but there is clearly going to be an element of academic selection in the government's plans, and up to now there's really been a consensus that that shouldn't have a place in the way that education in England works. And what the Prime Minister will have to do is convince people that if she does introduce this element of academic selection,
Some people will not be disadvantaged, existing schools won't be disadvantaged, that middle-class parents won't be able to colonise the system, if you like, by being able to pay for private tuition to get their children maybe into better schools or through any kind of academic selective test. She'll have to convince people of that, not least because if she doesn't, she won't get it through Parliament.
Andy, thank you. The government has unveiled a multi-million-pound plan to help prevent more people from being flooded this winter. After the wettest December for a century left around 16,000 homes across northern England underwater, £12.5 million is being put towards new temporary flood defences. But some victims have told us the plan is little more than a sticking plaster. Simon Vigar reports.
Roads becoming rivers have become a regular sight of winter in the UK. This was Carlisle last year, and this was Carlisle United Football Club. The North bore the brunt last winter. The one before that, it was Somerset and the Thames Valley. Today, the Floods Minister inspected new temporary defences like these.
No minister can say that there will never ever be a flood ever again. We just don't control the weather. What I can say is that we are putting more into flood defences. We have got these temporary barriers, 4 times as many as we had last winter. They will be deployed where they're needed.
The temporary defences will be held at 7 strategic locations around England at a cost of £12.5 million. But that's a fraction of the cost of last year's winter flooding, which topped £5 billion. And these are just the temporary ones. Lots of the permanent ones in recent years simply haven't worked. This may look like a lovely stretch of the River Thames in Berkshire, but it's not. It's an entirely man-made offshoot which gets even bigger after storms.
For the towns it bypasses, like Maidenhead and Windsor, this is a good thing, but all of this water has to go somewhere, and it goes back into the Thames. And for the towns downstream of that, like Datchet and Wraysbury, this is not a good thing.
One of the local campaigners here is not exactly thrilled by today's announcement.
Waste of money, too little, too late, could be better spent elsewhere. I don't understand what they're doing other than just messing around at the edges. We have a really, really big problem that will be here for hundreds or even thousands of years.
The government says billions are being spent on existing and new permanent defences. But get used to sites like this. The Met Office has confirmed what we all suspected. Climate change means that winter storms are getting worse. Simon Vigar, 5 News.
Patients in England are facing record levels of delays in being discharged from hospitals. New figures show more than 180,000 days were lost to so-called bed blocking in July, a big rise on the year before. Well, our health correspondent Catherine Jones joins me now, and this is a problem that just seems to be getting worse and worse, Catherine.
Well, it is really worrying evidence of just how much the NHS and local authorities are failing to keep pace with the demands of elderly, vulnerable people who need support in their own homes. So-called bed blocking is when patients like that are medically fit to leave hospital, but they are waiting for some form of social care to be put in place, like a Meals on Wheels or a rehabilitation programme, for example. So to look at the figures, in July last year, just over 147,000 days of hospital care were lost because of this across England. 12 months later, the number of hospital days lost through bed blocking has reached more than 184,000. That's a huge jump. It's 25% worse in just a year.
Presumably with all these things, there's going to be a ripple-down effect and there'll be an impact right across the health service.
Bed blocking is bad for the patients, it doesn't help their recovery. It's disastrous for the NHS because you think about the patients in A&E on a trolley waiting to get admitted. They can't because there's no bed for them. The patients waiting for a routine operation, they can't come in because there isn't a bed for them to recover in. It ripples across the whole system, like you say, and it's unsurprising then that also today all the other figures out for July, from ambulance response times to A&E waits, they have also all missed their targets. July's meant to be a time when the pressure eases off, not this time.
Oh dear, thank you. Counter-terrorism police have arrested 2 men over a plot that's believed to be linked to Islamic extremism. Scotland Yard say a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old are being questioned after a pre-planned raid on a house in West London. And the President of the European Council has told Theresa May that the ball is now in Britain's court when it comes to Brexit. Donald Tusk met the Prime Minister in Downing Street to discuss the next steps. He says it's time for her to clarify when she'll trigger Article 50, ideally as soon as possible. A taxi driver who's on trial for murder has accused a senior detective of being corrupt. Christopher Halliwell is alleged to have killed 20-year-old Becky Godden. Well, today in court, he questioned the officer who successfully got him convicted of another murder. Well, Julian Drucker is at Bristol Crown Court for us. And Julian, talk us through what happened in court today.
Danny, the man accused of murder in this complex case, today faced the police officer who brought him to justice over a separate murder. Now, back in 2011, police were investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old sex worker Sian O'Callaghan. The man on trial, Christopher Halliwell, is currently serving a life sentence after he admitted murdering her. Now, it was during that investigation, he told police, he had information about another woman who'd gone missing years before. That was 20-year-old Becky Godden. Mr. Halliwell took police to a field in Gloucestershire where he said he had buried Becky. Police made their discovery, though Mr. Halliwell denies murdering her. Now, the officer he gave that information to was Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher. He was called as a witness today, and as Mr. Halliwell is defending himself in court, it meant he got to cross-examine that officer. This unusual scenario led to some testy exchanges. He called the officer corrupt, and he told him in court, "Oh, and by the way, it was a pleasure ruining your career." Mr. Fulcher replied, "I'm sure." This trial will hear from further witnesses tomorrow.
Julian, thank you very much. Still to come on the programme. Looks good at a distance, but how repairing the Palace of Westminster could cost us taxpayers a small fortune. And the woman aiming to become Britain's most successful Paralympian. All that and much more after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News. The number of children who've made calls to advice lines because of suicidal thoughts has risen dramatically. The charity Childline says in the past year it's held nearly 20,000 counselling sessions, twice as many as they did 5 years ago. It says it's partly because of new pressures facing today's children. Well, Dominic Reynolds has been to meet one man who's had to cope with the suicide of his brother.
He was always the smarter one. I've got an older brother, and I think me and him were like the test children, and then he was the complete one.
Liam was the youngest of the boisterous Hearn brothers, but at 14 he turned quieter, and one evening his brother Aaron found him in his bedroom. Aaron had to call his family to tell them Liam had taken his own life.
It was the most hardest thing ever. Just to let them know, you know, how do you tell someone that a piece of their heart will forever be broken? You know, their young brother, their young son has been taken away from them.
What would you have said to him that morning if you'd known what he was contemplating?
I love you. I had told him I loved him, and I would have never left his side. You know, I would have just held him.
The charity Childline has revealed young people made 19,481 calls last year to talk about suicidal thoughts. Those figures have gone up sharply, a 50% increase in the past 5 years. That's 53 conversations every day, with the charity referring many callers to emergency services.
Hi, you're through to someone you can speak to at Childline.
Alex has been taking calls here for 15 years. He says as young people's lives have moved online, the problems he hears have changed. And often the internet is part of the story.
It can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. So it can be a good thing in terms of the support that young people give each other, and that peer support is really, really important. However, what we are also seeing is, for example, things such as bullying. It follows them wherever they go. They're constantly online.
Childline wants the government to deliver more frontline therapy services that they can send young people to. But Aaron's message is for anyone who feels as desperate as his brother Liam did, to try and start a conversation with somebody.
There's no doubt in my mind. You know, everyone has someone that loves them. Everyone has someone that cares about them. Believe, because you are special. There is a lot of people that love you. You will be missed if you are gone.
Aaron Hearn speaking to Dominic Reynolds there. Well, just to say, if you have been affected by anything in that report, or want more information on who you can call, do head to our Facebook page. It's got all the links there and numbers for several advice lines. So search on Facebook for Channel 5 News. It's one of the world's most iconic and important landmarks. Now a report has warned the Houses of Parliament is falling apart, and unless it gets £4 billion of repairs at taxpayers' expense, there could be a catastrophic event. Well, the catch for MPs, they'd have to move out for 6 years. Minnie Stevenson has been for an inspection.
The Palace of Westminster, one of the most iconic buildings in the world. A symbol of democracy, the beating heart of British politics. But the halls of power are crumbling, say a senior parliamentary committee. MPs and peers, it's been suggested, need to move out for at least 6 years for what's been called an urgent restoration. Now, this is the part of the Palace of Westminster that you never get to see. We are underneath the corridors of power in the basement. And if you just come with me over here, we've got telephone wires hanging out there, apparently still in use. And over here, we've only been here for a matter of moments, we've got some electricity cables. Now, a report found that it's also riddled with asbestos down here. And if it's not fixed, the risk of a fire is also highly likely. But if the restoration is to go ahead, it could cost the taxpayer over £4 billion. But will it be money well spent? A question I put to one of the MPs calling for action. It's going to cost billions of pounds to restore it. How attractive is that as a proposition to the taxpayer? Do you think they'll think that's important?
I think there are two things we can get out of this. First of all, we can really improve access for the public to that building. It's really difficult at the moment. Sometimes if you're queuing outside, you'll be queuing for 3/4 of an hour in the rain. We should be welcoming people in through the door so that they can see the business that we do.
If the building work goes ahead, it'll be the first time MPs have moved out since World War II, when the Commons chamber was bombed. And it's been suggested they move here to the Department of Health building, just down the road from the Palace of Westminster. The proposals still need to be approved by Parliament and the government, but if it gets the go-ahead, work will begin in 2023. Those in favour say this isn't just about saving the Palace of Westminster, but a symbol of our national identity. Minnie Stevenson, 5 News.
What a big project. Now, as sporting heroes go, Sarah Storey is one of the biggest. After winning 6 Paralympic medals in the swimming, she switched her attention to cycling and promptly picked up 6 more. Then after London 2012, she gave birth to her first child and within months was back winning 4 world titles. Well, today in Rio, her attempt to become Britain's best ever female Paralympian got off to the best possible start. Peter Lane reports.
An eye-catching, jaw-dropping start to the opening ceremony. A wheelchair, mid-air somersault, and then fireworks lighting up Rio's Maracanã Stadium. For these, the biggest Paralympics yet. More athletes taking part and more countries broadcasting the Games than ever. There were tender moments too. Snowboarder Amy Purdy, who lost her lower legs to meningitis, danced with a robot to symbolise the union between humans and technology. Britain's athletes were led by equestrian gold medalist Lee Pearson, but with the action kicking off today, all eyes have been on the velodrome. Briton Megan Giglia broke her own world record there this afternoon, qualifying in the 3K pursuit and goes for gold later. Not long after, Dame Sarah Storey broke her own world record too. Gold tonight will see her become our most decorated female Paralympian. Back home at the National Cycling Centre in Manchester, where Sarah Storey and co train, fellow athlete John Gildy, who just missed out on qualifying for the Paralympics, told me this is a golden opportunity for so many Brits.
Starting off the day with such strong riders, then hopefully it'll go the same way as with the Olympics. That the success will keep breeding success. The positive bunch, they've been through. A lot of them have been through a lot of tough times in life and a lot of adversity anyway. So nothing's a given, but I think the there's some real potential for some fantastic performances, so we'll see.
Sarah Story's Paralympic medal winning began not on wheels but in water years ago. An ear infection saw her move from swimming to cycling. 4 of the golds she's already collected were from the London Games. She and her teammates will be hoping to top their overall London tally of 120 medals with even more success in Rio. Peter Lane, 5 News.
And best of luck to our Paralympic team. Well, that's it from us. I'm back at 6:30 with 5 News tonight, when we'll be debating the issue of grammar schools. And of course, we want to hear your views. Do they drive up standards, or do they unfairly divide children into winners and losers? Well, do get in touch via our Facebook page. Plus, I'll be meeting the man behind an invention which could save thousands of lives. Well, a British student has come up with a device which could revolutionise the way vaccines are delivered to remote areas. Well, I'll be finding out how he was inspired by a camping trip with his mates, would you believe it? And just a little bit of Einstein. Plus, we'll have lots more on the Paralympics, as I'm joined in the studio by former wheelchair basketball silver medalist Joe Jayaratne. Well, Sean Welby's got the weather next. I'll see you in an hour's time. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.